Half second. Thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon, this evening. As mentioned, it is my pleasure to be with you. I am so grateful that all of you have attended tonight, and it is my privilege to be able to talk to you, as has been my pension plan. But before I begin, I would like to offer just a few comments about myself and who I am, just so you might have a better understanding of where I come from. As mentioned, I'm from Lloydminster, Alberta, and I graduated from high school some years ago, and then I acquired a degree in economics from the University of Calgary, and I graduated from the university right when the lockdown started. And so, of course, it meant for me, like so many other Canadians across the country and citizens across the world, that we were unable to acquire jobs in our field. And so, as I was looking around for work, I began to drive truck. I hauled grain for a little while. I had my class one out of high school and thought, well, why not? I might as well put it to good use. And so as I was driving and hauling grain, I started a few social media pages in which I would take what was happening on any given particular day, politically especially, and then I would try and make sense of it from an economic perspective, so that more people across the country might have a better understanding of what was happening and what would be the consequences of what was happening. And the Lord blessed it richly and has now allowed me to travel across the province, talking to various Albertans at various town halls about these economic issues, lots of economic issues that are currently facing the province and country at large. And finally, I was just married. My wife is in attendance tonight, just a few months ago. Thank you. And it's been so much fun to be able to travel around with her. It's been so much better than traveling alone, to be entirely honest. And she's been a wonderful, wonderful support. And again, it's our privilege to talk to you tonight. So I'm going to make my speech as brief as I can. And as has been discussed, I'm going to talk to you about the Alberta pension plan, or this proposed Alberta pension plan. Because you know as well as I know that when this plan is so much as discussed or so much as mentioned, whether online or in person, it sparks immediately this dynamic and often very hot political discussion on both sides of the aisle. The moment this proposed pension is mentioned is the moment that you ignite this roaring fire of a debate or a conversation back and forth. And I think the reason that the discussion is so hot, at least in part, is because the facts are difficult to understand. It's difficult to read up on this pension and other pensions like it. And so I think there is a lot of misunderstanding that is right now floating around in the political spheres that cause us a great deal of grief. And so I thought it best tonight to come before you and talk about a few of these particular points that we hear every time this conversation is mentioned. And I'm going to do my best to try and make sense of these points so that we can better understand the Alberta Pension Plan proposal and the Canadian Pension Plan, and allow then Albertans to make a more informed decision about what they believe the best plan for themselves and their families is. For example, suppose that a man or a woman decides to mention the Alberta Pension Plan online. Almost immediately, they are bombarded with accusations or fears that if Alberta had its own pension plan, if Alberta decided to leave the Canadian pension plan, Alberta seniors, or soon-to-be seniors, would see their pension checks, if not reduced significantly, reduced entirely to nothing. The fear is an Alberta pension plan would rip your pension check away. That's the concern. That's the worry. And as far as I'm concerned, I think this is justified. I think it's a legitimate concern. Here is what I mean. You and I are right now living in an inflated economy. We don't need to be economists or analysts to know that. We just have to go to the grocery store or to the gas pumps. We know that the price of living continues to rise. The cost of living continues to increase. Now, for a younger individual, like myself, or like your children or grandchildren, we can offset this unfortunate increase in the cost of living, or at least we can try to offset it. We can get more jobs. We can try and work 2 or 3 jobs. or I can pick up more hours at the warehouse, or do this and that. I can try and maneuver my workability so that I earn more income and at least a little bit offset the inflation which is raging and has been raging for a few years now. But the same is not true with seniors. Seniors have already worked. They've already worked their entire lives, and they are now supposed to be enjoying retirement. I think it a travesty, I think it a disgrace to see that so many seniors are forced to go back to work to try and make ends meet. I think it's a shame, and I think it's a violation of the commandment that we in this country should watch as so many of our elderly are forced to return to work to try and keep the heat on. But nevertheless, you understand this problem to be true. As the cost of living continues to rise, because the senior has already worked his or her entire life, their income does not rise. It stays steady. It stays stagnant, for the most part. And so what does this mean? It means that as the cost of living continues to increase, as inflation continues to rise, relatively speaking, the senior becomes poorer. $10 today did not buy you, or does not buy you today, what it did 10 or 20 years ago. $100 today doesn't buy what it did 30 years ago. And so as this inflation continues to increase, and it still is increasing, even though we hear a lot about how inflation is down, it's still in the positives. With the senior's income remaining equal or level, all things considered, they are gradually becoming poorer. And so then it makes sense to me that they should be, and we should be, concerned about the Canada pension or the Alberta pension. In this inflated economy, we need every dollar that we can get to live, to enjoy the quality of life that we're supposed to enjoy in this country. And if that pension every month were ripped away from an individual, or if it were reduced even by 50 or 25 or 75%, the consequences would be devastating. So I think it's a good question to ask. Would the Alberta pension plan reduce or remove entirely your Canada pension or your Alberta pension checks? Well, to try and discover the answer, I went looking, I went researching, and I stumbled upon a document online. I stumbled upon the Canada Pension Plan Act. You can read it online, it's available, it's free, and it's a very exciting act to read. and if you have a weekend, you can get through half of it. It's large, but it's there. And in the first few sections of the Act, particularly Section 3, there are rules and regulations that are laid out for a province that wants to leave the Canadian pension plan and form its own pension plan. Because the province can do that legally. It does not even actually require the agreement of the other provinces to do so. It has the legal ability to right now declare its intention to start its own pension plan. But no, according to the rules and regulations, if a province wants to leave the Canadian pension plan, it must start its own pension plan. And this pension plan must be, and this is verbatim, comparable in its benefits with the Canadian pension plan. That's what the law says. So I began to think about it. I said, suppose that an Alberta government, whatever color, blue, orange, red, green, whatever, decided to leave the Canadian pension plan and start its own Alberta pension plan. But as it was doing so, it said, we are going to reduce the senior's pension check by 75%. Would that satisfy the conditions of Section 3 of the Canadian Pension Plan Act? The answer is no. Albertans would not be receiving comparable benefits to what they were with the Canadian pension plan. So too, if the government said, well, we're going to leave the Canadian pension plan and we're going to actually have nothing in its place. Albertans are just going to invest on their own. Legally, would that be allowed? The answer is no, because it violates the rules of Section 3 of the Canadian Pension Plan Act. And so you would see the federal government or the courts step in and they'd say, wait a second, Alberta or Saskatchewan or BC, you can't have your own pension plan if you set it up like that because you are not following the rules of the Act. And of course, more than that, a government which decided to cut seniors' pensions, or at least tried to, would be devastating for their re-election, and rightfully so. I think it's cruel and ridiculous to dare say that what has been promised to seniors and what they have paid into all their entire lives, their working lives, should be ripped away from them in retirement. That's nonsense. And so that satisfied my curiosity. It seems as though the law is rather clear. But of course, even if that's granted, even if it's granted, that perhaps Alberta would, or an Alberta pension plan would, see benefits just like the CPP, the next contention is raised. And this is perhaps the most common, or one of the most common contentions that we hear. And it goes something like this. Commentators online or pundits in person will say, why on earth would Alberta want to leave the Canadian pension plan when right now the Canadian pension plan is performing so marvelously in the world? I don't even know if you need me up here, but and nevertheless, that is the argument. And further, they digress, or they discuss a bit more, and they say, right now the Canadian pension plan is one of the largest pension, or at least public pensions, government pensions, federal pensions, and so on, in the world. Federal's the wrong word, but you know what I'm talking about, in the world. And it receives marvelous rates of return on its investments. Over 10 years on the average, it receives between a 9 and 10% rate of return on its investments. So what would possess us as a people to dare say that we should even consider wanting to leave the Canadian pension plan if it earns such marvelous returns, these 9 or 10% rates of return over 10 years when you look at the average? Now, to answer the question, you have to begin very carefully by discussing a problem with the original statement. You see, when bureaucrats or pundits talk about this 9 or 10% rate of return on investment, I fear that it is too often insinuated in your minds and in mine that because the Canadian pension plan is supposedly performing so marvelously, so too we as individuals, or you as seniors individuals, are performing marvelously as well. I fear that's the insinuation. Is it true? Is it accurate? Well, to answer the question, all we have to do is look at how the Canadian pension plan works. And very simply, it works like this. Workers across Alberta and across the country, except for Quebec, because Quebec never opted into the Canadian pension plan. It has its own pension plan, the Quebec pension plan. Workers across the country, every paycheck, pay money to the Canadian pension plan. And the Canadian pension plan's appetite is voracious. It's hungry. It loves to chew up the money. And so the Canadian pension plan brings in tens of billions of dollars. It's about 55-ish billion. It varies a bit, but we'll say 55 just for ease of mathematics. $55 billion a year is what the Canadian pension plan consumes. Now this, as fast as the Canadian pension plan brings in that money, it sends almost all of it out to seniors, to pensioners. So it brings in the money, and just as quickly it sends it out to those who are collecting their pension checks. So that when all is said and done, there's maybe about a $3-ish billion surplus. There's about $3-ish billion left over. Now, bear in mind, that number will change. That number is changing as soon as next year. But for right now, there's about $3 billion-ish left over when all is said and done. And so what does the Canadian pension plan do with that money? Do they give it back to you in the form of a check at the end of the year? No. Do they give it back to or do they give it to the government? Well, officially, no. No, instead, the Canadian pension plan takes those billions of dollars, $3-ish billion, let's say, and they send it to the Canadian Pension Plan Investing Board. They send it to the board, and they tell this Canadian Pension Plan Investing Board to obviously invest it on their behalf. And the CPPIB has been doing this for some time now, year after year, and they have accumulated an asset pile that officially is worth about $700 billion. It's a very large pile, very large pile. And so that's in essence how the CPP, the Canadian Pension Plan, works. That's how simplified, but simply the Canadian pension plan operates. So when we hear bureaucrats or politicians or pundits talk about the 9 or 10% rates of return on the CPP's investment, they are talking about this pile, the Canadian Pension Plan Investing Board's rate of return. They are talking about this investment over here. That's what they're discussing. That's what they mean. So the question has to be asked, does the size of this pile, or does the performance of the Canadian Pension Plan Investing Board have any bearing whatsoever on your individual performance, on the size of your pension check? Well, there are 3 factors that determine how large your Canadian pension plan check is. The first factor is the age at which you decide to pull your pension. Did you pull it at 65? Did you pull it at 70? You waited a bit, or did you pull it early? 63, let's say. What age did you pull your pension? The second factor that has to be accounted for is the amount of money that you contributed to the Canadian pension plan while you were working. Did you make a lot of money and so contribute a lot of money to the CPP? Or did you make just a little bit of money and so contribute only a little bit to the CPP? And finally, the last question the CPP asks when determining the size of your pension check is, how long did you work? Did you work for 20 years? Did you work for 30 years? Did you work for 5 years? How long did you work? It is those 3 factors, the age at which you pull your pension, the amount of money you made or contributed to the CPP while working, and the number of years that you worked, that determine the size of your pension check. So we can now ask the question, is there any correlation whatsoever between this equation and the performance of the Canadian Pension Plan Investing Board? There is no correlation. No correlation whatsoever. This Canadian Pension Plan Investing Board might earn a 10,000% rate of return one year. Your pension checks would stay the same. Now, similarly, this Canadian Pension Plan Investing Board might earn a negative rate of return on its investments one year. It might do very poorly. Maybe it loses 10,000%. Still yet, your pension checks would stay the same. So if there is an insinuation that the performance of the CPPIB correlates with your individual performance, it's false. It's wrong. The 2 equations are totally different. So then, of course, we can say to ourselves, well, if we have a difference here, what exactly is our performance? How well are we doing with the Canadian pension plan? What are my individual rates of return when I retire? So the CPP was started in the 60s, 66, and those who retired in 66 or 67, and so received the first year or 2 of Canadian pension plan checks, earned about a 40% rate of return on their investment. Marvelous, miraculous. We'll never see it again. Of course, the only reason that that number was 40% is just because it was the first year or 2 that the Canadian pension plan was in existence. And of course, everyone who retired in, say, 1967 would have been born in 1906 or 1905, and those who were born in 1905 are either now dead, or if they're not dead, they're still in government, and and so their returns don't concern us, really, do they? No, we're concerned about present returns. I'm concerned about future returns. What are they going to be? What are they right now? Well, maybe if they're not 40%, maybe they're 30%. No, they're not 30%. Well, maybe they're 20%. Not 20. Okay, maybe they're 10%. You know, like a very, conservatively performing mutual fund. That's doing quite well, 10%. Not 10%. Maybe 7%. Not 7%. No. No, for pensioners coming into the system now, and for a great deal of pensioners already, the average rate of return on your Canadian pension plan checks expressed as a percentage, is between 2.5% and 4%. I was astonished to see these numbers because I was told, it was insinuated to me, like to so many other Canadians, that this pension plan was a juggernaut for individuals. I was told without this, we'd be hooped. No hope for the Canadian. That's what the government wants us to believe. But when you look at the actual numbers, they're so much smaller than what we might initially expect. And remember, those earnings, those checks are taxed. How is it possible that you, all your working life, pay a tax to the government, which is what? Or to the CPP. It is a tax. Call it a contribution, whatever. All your life you pay it. And then when you receive it back, it's taxed again. It's nonsense. I do not believe it's right. And I think it's another example of not honoring our parents, our fathers and our mothers. Okay, so all of this then provided. What about an Alberta pension plan? Is there really an economic benefit to be captured with an Alberta pension plan? Is it possible that we have an opportunity right now before us to increase the quality of life of our seniors or families and so on in this province? The answer is yes. There is an opportunity before us. You can read the papers from Fraser Institute. You can read the papers from other economists. There is a benefit that is available for us to have right now. It's before us. It's right here for us to use to increase the quality of our life. And we say, why is that the case? Why is it that an Alberta pension plan could afford us economic benefit? Well, as you know, we have an advantage in this province. We have an Alberta advantage. We are on the average younger than other provinces. We on the average work more than other provinces. And on the average, we are wealthier than other provinces. These three factors are true. And this enables or builds, constructs a habitable ecosystem for an Alberta pension plan to insinuate itself and grow. This Alberta advantage is here right now. And of course, you can look at the data to prove that it's true. Fine, we say. So there is a benefit to be captured. But how large is it? Is it $1? Is it $2? You know, if it's only $5, I'll just save myself the hassle and I'll remain with the CPP and so on. Now this is a good question. How large is the benefit? And on this particular point, commentators and researchers and so on, economists and analysts, have a disagreement. They're disagreed on the amount of benefit that there is to be captured. They're agreed that there is a benefit. That is, that's practically a uniform agreement. The actual size of the benefit, there they go back and forth. There are some, as you know, like LifeWorks, who estimate a benefit of upwards to $1,400 per person with an Alberta pension plan. Other economists, like Trevor Toome, say, no, it's actually only X number of hundreds of dollars large. But no one denies that there is a benefit. So let's suppose then we take an average estimate of the benefit that's to be captured for an Albertan per year with an Alberta pension plan of $1,000. Let's say an Alberta pension plan saves an Albertan $1,000 every year on the average. Again, just for simple mathematics. Now, $1,000 is a lot of money. It's a lot of money in this economy. You know it and I know it. That's 2 tanks of gas. But it's really so much larger. When you think about a principle that's discussed in elementary economics, when you consider a principle called opportunity cost, the benefit, the saving that could accrue to Albertans actually looks so much larger. Here's what I mean. Here's how I explain it. So, as I mentioned at the start of this speech, I'm just married. I was married 7 months ago now, so it's actually almost a year. It's flying by. It's been wonderful. But as I was dating my wife, and trying to entice her to marry me, I had to work very hard to do so because she's very pretty and I'm very not. And, and so, I would work my hardest to say, let's get married. And of course, like all other men, one of the things I would do is go for supper with Paige, with my then girlfriend. And so one night I say to her, darling, let's go for supper. I'd like to take you out. And this won't be an ordinary supper. You know, let's go somewhere really fancy. I have somewhere special planned. And so if you'd like, do feel free to throw on your best dress. I'm going to wear my best dress clothes, and we'll go out for supper. We'll have a nice date. And of course, she was so excited, and I was so excited. And we get in the car, and I pick her up. We get in the car, and I say, all right, you know what? I'm so excited about this dinner that you should close your eyes. Be a surprise when we pull up to the location, hey? And she says, yeah, that sounds great. I'm so excited. So she does, you know. She's covered her eyes, and she's excited, and I'm excited, and we drive around for 5 minutes, and I pull up to the restaurant, and I tell her, Paige, darling, you can open your eyes. And so she does, gasps, and she says, oh, you've taken me to Denny's. And, and I love Denny's. Actually, she does too. We both do. The pancakes are perfection. But, you know, usually don't wear a nice outfit to Denny's and so on, but I'm trying to entice her. So we go, and we have pancakes, my favorite, and I get a buttermilk stack and so on, and we enjoy our meal. And then it's time to pay. And so I hand the waitress a $100 bill. Keep the change, I say. You know, the meal was $99, keep the tip. And so, and so I do, and we're driving back to Paige's parents' place, and I say, wasn't that a wonderful, wonderful meal? And she says, oh yes, it was fantastic. What a date. And she says, can you believe it? All of that for only $100. That's all it cost us. And as she said so, I pulled over, and I turned to her and I said, well, hold on a second. We have to think about this for a moment, about the cost of the date. It's true it cost me, or us, explicitly $100. I pulled out my wallet and gave the waitress a $100 bill. But what if we hadn't gone for supper tonight? What if instead, you and I, when we were married, had taken that $100, which we wouldn't have spent, given it to our mutual funds advisor, and had him or her invest it? Well, for the next 10, 20, 30, and 40 years, it would have accrued investment income. So that when you and I retired, darling, we would have had some $2,000-ish to use at our disposal, our free disposal. And so you see, the meal tonight did not cost us $100. It cost us $100 plus the foregone investment income of $2,000 that we would have had if we had invested the money. And so the meal tonight cost us $2,100. And then, Paige is my wife is incredibly smart, and she shakes her head, and she goes, oh, this is why all of you economists are single. And we went along our merry way. Now, of course, the story is fictional, but the principle is not. The principle says, when looking at a saving or a benefit, it's true you have to look at the initial saving, the $1,000. You must also look at the opportunity cost to make the proper policy. Suppose an Albertan saved $1,000 every year with the Alberta pension plan. That's a lot of money. But if you invest that $1,000 in year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, all the way to year 30 or 40, you will have hundreds of thousands of dollars to use at your disposal when you retire, that you otherwise wouldn't have had it have been shoveled off to Ottawa. Or you could take that money and pay off your car quicker. You could do some renovations in the home. You could pay for your child's education. You could do all of these things that you otherwise wouldn't have been able to do because the money would have been sent elsewhere. That is the principle of opportunity cost. And so is there an economic benefit to be captured? Yes, absolutely. Now, unfortunately, I'm running out of time, but of course we'll be here for questions after, and so I want to just very quickly mention this last point for you. The final contention we hear, even if it's granted that these things are true by those who maybe are not so excited or are so interested in an Alberta pension plan, the final contention is this. If Alberta had its own pension plan, there is a very great risk, or there would be a very great risk, that the Alberta government, whatever color it is, blue, red, orange, green, doesn't matter, would control the pension plan. And again, we share this same concern. The last thing I am standing up here advocating for is a pension plan controlled by government. I know the same is true of Mitch. I know the same is true of Dennis. I know the same is true of those who are at the Alberta First pension plan. The last thing they want is a pension. The last thing I want is a pension controlled by government. Why is that the case? Well, you have a pension here, you have a government over here. The purpose of a pension, properly instituted, is really very simple. The purpose of a pension is to earn you money and to make sure the money is there when you retire. That's it. It's to earn you as much money as possible, as wisely as possible, while mitigating risk, so that the money is there for you when you come for it at your retirement. That's all. The purpose of a pension plan is only that. It is not to push a social policy. It is not to pursue diversity or equity or inclusion. It is not to push a government program. The purpose of government is different. Properly instituted, properly instituted. The purpose of government is to serve the people that elected them. It is to serve the nation by moving it in the direction that the people wanted it to go. So right away you can see that the purposes, the reason for the existence of a pension plan and the government, or a government, municipal, federal, provincial, are very different. So suppose then that the government did control the pension plan. You and I can very easily see them taking their left hand or their right hand, moving it behind their back, and taking a few millions of dollars from the coffers and investing it in what is a very poor economic investment, but might be a very profitable political one. What is a few million, or what are a few $1 million for government to spend to guarantee a majority in the next election? What are a few millions of government should they spend to guarantee an extra seat or two in the legislature or the House of Commons? That doesn't earn me money, doesn't earn you money. No, instead that tends to lose money, and lose a lot of it. So we cannot have government operating the pension, and more than that, we cannot have government appointing the board members who operate the pension. Now again, I'm out of time unfortunately, but again, if you would like to discuss this further, please, during the Q&A, ask the question how we think it ought to be instituted, and I'd be happy to delve into the issue further, or at least a proposal further, so we can mitigate this government intervention in these markets. These 3 points satisfied then, fulfilled. 1, would an Alberta pension plan reduce your earnings as a pensioner? The answer is legally no. 2, is there an economic benefit to be captured with an Alberta pension plan, properly instituted? Yes. And 3, would government run the pension? It can't. It won't. And if they tried to, if they were right now saying we want to run it, we wouldn't be advocating for it. Those 3 points satisfied, it is my opinion that this pension is a good pension plan. This Alberta pension plan, dare I say, is a necessary step. I think it a critical step in guaranteeing and helping secure all of the rights and the freedoms and the dignities that you and your children and your grandchildren and your parents and your grandparents deserve. Thank you.